Hello friends, I am glad to see you again. Today I will tell you about the Homeowners Association and my neighbor. I didn't think you could get the police called on you for swimming in your own pool until it happened to me on a Tuesday afternoon that started like any other. A list of errands, a muggy sky, and a pair of blue goggles I use when I want to turn my brain off for 20 laps. The part that makes people blink when I tell the story isn't the pool though. It's that my homeowner association decided to ban me from using it because my neighbor, who had washed her dog in it with foaming shampoo like it was a big backyard sink, complained about my unneighborly conduct when I told her she was no longer welcome in my yard. It sounds like a joke because it would be a better joke if it weren't so expensive and ridiculous. I live in a community with tidy front lawns, mailboxes that all match like they were birthed from the same catalog page, and an HOA that likes to write letters. I didn't go looking for a neighborhood with rules as much as I went looking for a place where the roof wouldn't collapse and the sidewalks weren't sprinkled with broken glass. The HOA came with the house, and the house came with something I never thought I'd be able to afford. A small, kidney-shaped pool behind a wooden fence tucked under a couple of crepe myrtles that have made every July feel like a confetti parade. The pool isn't part of the association. It's on my deed. It's not a shared amenity. Nobody pays for it except me, and I alone take the pleasure and the headaches that come with it. I'm not precious about it. It's a pool, not a painting. I've let neighbors use it when I'm home. The rules are simple. Ask first. Don't bring glass. Rinse off if you've been coated in sunscreen like frosting. And leave no trace except wet footprints that dry in 5 minutes. Plenty of folks have taken me up on that. Gavin down the street. He works nights. Sweet guy who speaks in a low voice like he's in a library, has come by on Sundays to float in a donut tube and listen to baseball on a tinny speaker. My upstairs neighbor from my apartment days, now a mom, brings her 2 kids once in a while to splash for 20 minutes while I grill chicken on the patio. I like community. What I don't like is being taken for granted in my own home. Enter Karen. Not the name on her mail, but it fits the shape of the story. I'll call her Karina, because that's what it sounds like when she says it with a tight jaw and an extra syllable. Karina moved in across the cul-de-sac, the one with the bright red watering cans and a doorbell that chimes like a piano lesson. We got along at first. She complimented my pavers and brought over a lemon loaf so sugary the knife stuck. Her dog, a golden mix named Moot, had a smiley face and a habit of trotting up to anyone holding food. The dog was the star of the problem. On the day it started, I was at work in my home office, on a call that must have used up every ounce of patience I had in reserve. The window was open, and the jasmine was making a strong case for why people write poems. Then I heard splashing. Not the soft slaps from my pump or the sound of a squirrel trying to drown itself in a bird bath. Real, energetic splashing. I peered through the blinds, and there she was, Karina in a visor, Moot in my pool, both covered in white foam like they were auditioning to be clouds. She had dragged one of my deck chairs over and was balanced at the edge, scrubbing. A bright plastic bottle sat on the concrete like a witness, deodorizing dog shampoo. I walked out the back door and tried to keep my voice even. Karina? Oh, hey. She didn't stop rubbing. Moot got into something at the park. He rolled in it. A bath is urgent. In my pool? Well, you said neighbors could swim sometimes, she said, like this was an algebra problem she had solved cleverly. And he's basically family. I wanted to laugh because that's what happens to me when something is so obviously not okay that my brain tilts sideways. Shampoo has surfactants, I said, like we were in a dull science lab. It throws off the chemistry. It can mess with the pump and the filter. It's not a giant dog tub. He's a good boy, she said, offended on his behalf, which wasn't the point at all. I'm being careful. I got the bottle. The label had a dog with sparkling stars around it. There's a drain, she added, waving vaguely, as though water magically disappears into the earth without consequence, as though the rules about where pool water can go in our city existed for no reason. I don't speak the language of confrontation fluently, but it turns out I'm conversational when you put me in a corner. Karina, I'm going to have to replace water to rebalance this. That costs money and time. For future reference, the pool is for people, not dog baths. Please get him out. She gave me the look of a person who has never heard the word no spoken with full punctuation. But she did it. Moot shook, and a fine mist blessed everything within a 6-foot radius. You make a big deal out of everything, she said softly. The way someone might say, you're difficult while wearing a coat of kindness. I didn't bill her. I didn't yell. I did what I could to make the pool safe again. That night I backwashed the filter. used more test strips than a high school chemistry class, and wrote down the numbers in a notebook I keep for the house. I ended up draining a third of the water and refilling it by morning so the levels wouldn't make my eyes burn. I also put a lock on the side gate because the world had taught me that please don't sometimes needs a stronger friend. The next day, I told Karina she'd crossed a line. I stood on her walkway, and she stood in the doorway with her lips pressed together like they were holding in a secret. "I'm not comfortable with you using my pool anymore," I said in the gentlest voice. "I've always been generous about it, but dog shampoo isn't a gray area. I had to replace water, and it isn't safe to treat the pool like a pet wash. It's off limits for you from now on." She blinked like she'd been slapped by air. "Everybody thinks you're so nice," she said. "But I guess not to me." "You're welcome to wave from across the street," I said, because sometimes the closest available humor is also the easiest shield. That should have been that. If the world were sensible, this would be the part where we go about our lives, passing like ships with complicated schedules. But instead, 2 days later, I got the first of many envelopes from the HOA. It was one of those beige envelopes that scream business even before you read the return address. Inside was a letter with a tone of voice that didn't match any human I've ever met. It was a notice of compliance citing improper use of neighborhood amenities and disturbance arising from unauthorized bathing of animals. The kicker, until a hearing can be held, you are directed to cease use of the pool. I laughed out loud, then got serious when I reached the last paragraph about fines. My pool is not a neighborhood amenity. There's no community pool. That was part of why my backyard oasis made people jealous in the first place. The HOA didn't pay for a drop of my water or one tile on the coping, and yet here they were telling me I couldn't swim in it because Karina had used it like a pet spa. I called their office and got a woman named Lynn who sounded like she was reading from a script. "We received a complaint of dog bathing," she said, as if calling out bingo numbers. And during the preliminary investigation, the board decided it would be prudent to stop all use to avoid further violations. "Ma'am," I said, "it's my pool. That's not what the complaint suggests. It's behind my fence. It's on my deed. It's not subject to your amenity rules. The only investigation required is someone looking over the fence and seeing my address on the mailbox." "We have a hearing scheduled in 2 weeks," she said, as if she hadn't heard me, or as if hearing was optional. "You can present your case at that time." I hung up and pulled my closing paperwork from the file cabinet. It's a boring pile most days, but that day it felt like a shield. There it was. Lot map, plat, boundaries. The pool was inside the line of my private lot. The HOA had zero claim on it. They could tell me if my trash cans were visible from the street on Tuesdays after 5 p.m., but not whether I could swim in chlorinated water that I paid to pour. I decided the best thing for my sanity was the most normal thing I could do: swim my laps. It was hot, and the water had finally settled after the chemical circus. I moved the clock back 10 minutes because I planned to swim after work. I propped open the back door with a potted plant and set my towel on the chair that still had Moot's hair woven into the cushion like gold thread. I looked for an audience. Nobody was around except the occasional dragonfly. I put on my goggles, dove in, and did what I always do when I've had a week. Count strokes, breathe every 3, push the turn. I was on lap 15 when the shouting started. Not frantic, not playful. That brittle voice that tries to sound official but lands on annoyed. I popped up and saw Karina over the fence line on her toes, phone in hand like a referee's whistle. She had the HOA letter in the other hand, waving it like a warrant. "You're not allowed," she said. "They banned you." I took off my goggles and tried to keep my voice even. "You don't have the authority to enforce letters you made happen with your complaint about something you did. It's community property," she said, pointing with the letter toward what was very clearly my yard. "You let people in, so it's for everyone. I let people in as a courtesy. A courtesy isn't a covenant. Words rarely change minds when minds are set in concrete." She dialed a number and, in front of me, with theatrical clarity, called 911. "There's a dangerous situation," she said, eyes locked on mine. "A confrontation at the pool. He's violating a ban." I know how 911 works. You don't call it because you're mad. You call because someone's bleeding or on fire. But she was on a performance stage, and the audience wore blue uniforms. The officers arrived like they always do, measured, alert, polite, but ready. 2 cars, lights off, tires whispering. One officer, with a calm face that probably made toddlers stop crying, came through my side gate after I waved him in. Another officer spoke to Karina out front. The calm officer said, "We had a call about a disturbance." "I'm swimming in my pool," I said, spreading my arms so my wet skin would demonstrate my point. "And I have a letter that says my HOA thinks it can ban me from using it. They cannot." "Do you have proof this is your property?" he asked, not rude, just thorough. I've never been so grateful to be boring and organized. I ran inside, dripped all over the hardwood, grabbed the folder, and came back in flip-flops and a towel like a contestant on a game show about municipal records. I showed him the plat map, the deed, the line that hugged my yard like an embrace. He nodded, made a note, and asked if anyone was threatened. "Only my chlorine budget," I said, and he smiled once with just the eyes. The other officer came into the backyard with Karina trailing like a storm cloud. She jabbed her letter at him and said, "He's not allowed. The board said so." "Ma'am," the officer said evenly, "this is his property. A letter from a homeowners association is not a court order. It doesn't supersede property rights. If you have a civil dispute, you can take it to small claims or your HOA process. This is not a police matter." Karina's face did something like folding. "So he just gets to do whatever he wants?" "He gets to swim," the officer said. "And you need to stop calling 911 about rules that aren't criminal." They didn't cuff her. This isn't that kind of neighborhood, and this wasn't that kind of day. But the officer did mention that false reports can be a problem, that 911 is for emergencies, and that dispatch keeps records. He wrote an incident number on a card and handed it to me. "If you get any more of this," he said, "call the non-emergency line and reference this. We'll note that it's a civil matter." The cops left. The dragonflies returned. Karina, for once, had no speech ready. She stomped away in a walk that made her visor bounce. You would think an episode like that might cool things off. In most schools of life, being told no by people with badges is a stop sign, but it just rerouted the traffic. The next day, I received a new letter, this time certified, about a violation hearing scheduled for a Thursday at 6 o'clock at the clubhouse that looks like a dentist's waiting room. The letter said I had failed to comply with a directive to cease pool use pending investigation. It also mentioned fines of up to a number that would buy a nice dinner for 8. I put the letter beside a bowl of cherries and thought about how often organizations use the phrase "up to" make you nervous. I decided two things. I was going to that hearing with more paper than they wanted to carry home, and I was going to find out where exactly this directive came from. I read our governing documents the way I read warranties, at first with dread, then with growing amusement at how earnestly people write rules for other people. The CC&Rs were clear enough. The HOA could regulate the exterior common areas, paint color, holiday decorations, and even things like what kind of mailbox you can buy so the street doesn't look like a yard sale display. They could not, however, declare temporary martial law over a private pool. I also learned a very useful tidbit. Under our state's HOA statute, if they intended to impose fines, they had to give proper notice of a hearing and provide an opportunity to be heard. They also had to keep meetings open to members when disciplinary action was on the agenda, unless a closed session was requested. And they had to allow reasonable inspection of association records. That last part made a light bulb flicker on. Records. I sent a polite email to the board and the manager, quoting the statute like I was undercover in a boring spy movie. I requested the complaint in writing, the minutes of the meeting where any action was taken, and all correspondence between the board and any complainant regarding my property. I also asked for the architectural documents that supposedly gave them authority to ban my pool usage. I kept my tone even, but I made sure to put dates on everything. The law likes dates. The manager wrote back with a copy and paste about fees for document retrieval that made me think someone in the office had set up an autoresponder. I replied saying I'd come by the office to inspect in person. They offered me a window between 10 o'clock and 10:15 on a weekday, like they were doing me a favor. I took it, brought my notebook, and asked my friend Aria to come as a witness because she once worked in a law office and knows how to make people behave with nothing but a pen and quiet. The manager's office smelled like carpet cleaner and overripe banana. We were seated at a small table with a stack of papers so thin it looked like they'd shaved it off the top of a larger stack at the last minute. I leafed through and found exactly what I expected. An email from Karina to the board titled "Urgent, Dangerous Pool Activity," alleging that I had invited strangers to use a hazardous pool, that odors were wafting, and that she had used non-toxic pet cleaner in an effort to prevent contagion. It read like a novel nobody edited. There was also an email from the board president, a man named Duff, forwarding her complaint to the property manager with, "We need to look strong on this." Then a short note from the vice president. "Suspend his pool until we figure it out. We can use the nuisance clause if we need to." There were no minutes of a meeting authorizing any action. No vote, no legal basis, just a series of people convincing each other they had power they didn't. I took notes quietly and circled the phrases that would matter later. Suspend his pool, look strong, nuisance clause. Aria was a statue with eyebrows that say more than some people's biographies. "Can I copy these?" I asked. The manager said I could take photographs with my phone. I did, one by one, careful enough that even a picky judge would approve. On the way out, I looked at the bulletin board in the hallway where they post handouts about gardening and recycling. There was a flyer with a photo of a little girl in goggles at the top, and the words, "Swim Safety Save Lives." It was from the city's fire department, and I smiled a little at the irony. The same association that was telling me not to swim was plastering safety tips for families to enjoy pools. I prepared for the hearing like I prepare for a job interview I want to nail without wanting the job. Thoroughly, calmly, with a file folder labeled in neat handwriting, I printed the plat map in color and highlighted the pool's location inside my lot with a highlighter so bright it looked like it was yelling. I printed the emails I'd photographed, the portions of the CC and Rs about private property rights, and the state statute sections about due process and records. I wrote a brief statement about what had happened with Karina and Moot, including the part where I had been generous with pool access in the past, and the part where she used dog shampoo in my pool. I included my pool log with dates and chemical readings because I thought it would either bore them into leaving me alone or impress them that I cared about safety. I also brought a copy of the incident card from the police visit, because nothing settles a meeting like the knowledge someone else was willing to write something down. On the day of the hearing, I wore a collared shirt and jeans that didn't have paint on them. I arrived early with Aria because I expected the meeting to be open, and I wanted a seat where I could see everyone's faces. The clubhouse was precisely what I remembered. Tan walls, a faint whiff of cheaper coffee, tables that fold in half. The board sat at the front like a panel in a talent show. Duff, the president, had a tie with tiny anchors that seemed to believe he was the captain of something. The vice president, a woman named Mara, tapped her pen like she was playing a song on a desk. The manager sat to the side with a laptop open and a font size set for birds. They started with old business, then new business, then finally disciplinary matter. "We're going to go into closed session for this," Duff announced. "I don't consent to closed session," I said, standing up. "The statute allows for it when requested by either party. I'm the one facing discipline, and I prefer an open meeting." He looked surprised that a person with a pool could read. "It's more appropriate in closed session," he said. "It may be more comfortable for the board," I replied, "but I am asserting my right to have members present, to observe the process that might result in fines against me, and to ensure transparency." Mara muttered something about grandstanding. A couple of neighbors in back, there are always neighbors in back at these things, looked interested for the first time in the whole meeting. "Fine," Duff said, dragging the word like luggage. "Open session, Mr. Call me Sam," I said. That's my name because I prefer simple introductions when the room already feels complicated. He launched into the complaint, calling it serious, and then read a hodgepodge of allegations from Karina's email as though he were narrating a documentary. He ended with, "Until the investigation concludes, we considered it prudent to restrict the use of the pool." "It's my pool," I said mildly, and put the plat map on the projector shelf so they could all see. "The HOA has no authority to ban me from using it. You can enforce noise rules and nuisance rules if I'm actually creating a nuisance. You cannot declare a private fixture a community amenity because you're upset at me for telling my neighbor not to wash her dog in it." Mara frowned like she'd swallowed a pebble. "The nuisance clause gives the board broad authority. Broad doesn't mean infinite. Also, there was no board vote to suspend my pool." I held up the emails I'd printed. "There was an email chain where two people used language that sounds decisive, but no action taken in an open meeting. The letter you sent had no legal basis." The manager shifted in their chair. Duff looked at Mara. Mara looked at the ceiling as if help might be descending from the air ducts. I didn't raise my voice. I stayed on the assembled facts. I walked through the timeline, the police visit, the law about 911 calls being for emergencies, the right to use my property so long as I'm not injuring anyone or violating health codes. I explained the pool chemistry and why dog shampoo wasn't just soap, and why replacing water isn't something I do for fun. I ended with the simplest thing. I've been an easy neighbor. I've shared what I didn't have to share, but I won't let someone mislabel my yard as community property because it makes them feel important. A hand went up in the back. It was Gavin, the night shift guy with the donut raft. I've used Sam's pool, he said quietly, always with permission. It's been safe. He's a good neighbor. Another person raised a hand. A parent who brought her kids to splash sometimes. He makes my kids wear life jackets. He keeps it clean. He's more careful than the city pool. You could feel the gravity shift a little in the room when actual humans started saying things out loud instead of titles on letterhead. Duff did what people do when a plan starts to leak. He tried to find a patch. We want to ensure the community's safety, he said, which is a nice thing to say when you're wrong. I want that too, I replied. So let's stick to the things you can lawfully enforce. If you want to tell me not to host parties past 10, cool. If you want to remind me about drainage rules when I backwash the filter, also fine. But you cannot unilaterally ban me from swimming in my private pool because a neighbor misused it and is angry I set a boundary. They ended up backing down not out of conviction but out of air. They rescinded the ban, which was never valid to begin with, and tried to end the meeting on a note of, "We all learned something today." I didn't clap. If the story ended there, it would be an odd tale with a satisfying lesson. Read your documents, know your rights, don't let a letter scare you. But it didn't end there because people who get embarrassed sometimes try to save face by doubling down. If this were chess, what came next would be the part where a player sacrifices the wrong piece and discovers all at once why that piece mattered. 2 days after the hearing, I found a bright orange tag on my door. Notice of fine, nuisance. The itemized offense, encouraging trespassing by allowing non-residents to use private pool. I laughed at the contortions. Non-residents? They meant Gavin and a couple of neighbors whose addresses could be seen from my mailbox. The letter might as well have said, "We can't say you can't swim, so we'll say something else." They gave me 30 days to pay or face further enforcement. I knew what this was now. Not about rules, not about safety, but about authority. So I did the only thing that made sense. I prepared a response that didn't bark or whine. I asserted my right to internal dispute resolution as provided by our governing statutes, requested a meeting with a neutral board member, and demanded the fine be rescinded as retaliatory. I also included, not later than that same afternoon, a small claims court filing against Karina for the cost of chemicals and partial refill after her dog shampoo incident. It wasn't much money in the big picture. That wasn't the point. The point was to draw lines where lines belonged and to put consequences where behavior had blown bubbles. Before the dispute meeting could happen, the board tried something new. A notice showed up in everyone's mailbox about safety around private water features, complete with suggestions like, "Do not allow large gatherings that block sidewalks and always supervise children." Fine, good, sensible. But then there was a paragraph saying, "In light of recent concerns, the board will be considering a rule to limit the number of non-household guests using private pools." Arya texted me a 2-word reply. Nice try. I showed up at the next board meeting with more neighbors than usual. I wasn't trying to be a leader. I just didn't want to be the only one who knew what was going on. The board tried to present the new rule as a friendly safety measure. I stood up when they opened the floor. "You cannot regulate the guest list for private property the association doesn't maintain," I said, giving them the page number in the CC&Rs the way a teacher gives a student a hint. "You can enforce actual nuisances if they occur, not hypothetical ones. And you certainly can't pass a rule aimed at one household because a board member got their feelings hurt." That's when the real plot started to show itself. A neighbor named Sheila, who I'd only known as the woman who grows tomatoes like she's feeding an army, raised her hand. "While we're talking about pools," she said, "I'd like to ask why the HOA is paying for chemicals for a landscaping fountain that doesn't exist." The room tilted. She had found something in the budget. A line item for water feature maintenance had ballooned in the last few months. She had the numbers and the invoices. The payee on several of them matched a store I use for my pool supplies. The signature on the reimbursement checks looked suspiciously like Duff's. It seemed our HOA president might have been treating the HOA's petty cash like his own pool allowance. I didn't plan it. I didn't want a scandal. All I wanted was to swim in peace. But the minute that question landed, you could sense the oxygen leaving the leader's lungs. Mara stared at her notepad so hard I thought the paper might catch fire. The manager typed suddenly as if typing could solve things. Duff tried to make a joke about fountains and then remembered the audience wasn't laughing with him. We decided, as a group of neighbors who suddenly felt our blood pressure equalize, to ask for an independent audit. We had the right to request one with a certain number of signatures. We got double that on the spot. The meeting turned from an attempt to regulate private pools to a plan to examine how the board had been spending money. On the walk home, Aria shook her head. "You didn't start this," she said, "but you might finish it." I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like a person who had put on goggles to breathe every 3 strokes and come up in the middle of a different kind of swim meet. That night I slept like after a day I've earned, hard and even, my brain recataloging the mess into a story I wouldn't believe if I hadn't lived it. Morning brought one last envelope, a floral card from Karina. "You could have just been nice." I filed it with the others, proof niceness had been used against the simplest boundary I own, the right to say no inside my fence. As the note sat on the counter, Aria texted, "Budget docs downloaded." She and Sheila had sprinted on the audit. I opened a shared folder that hummed with trouble. Statements, check images, reimbursements labeled Water Feature Chemical Stabilization. Small alone, reeled together, and timed with the weeks the board tried to treat my pool like a nightclub. I built a timeline, complaint letter, 911, hearing, fine, safety rule, stacked against reimbursement dates. It didn't prove Duff used HOA funds on his pool, but it didn't help him. I printed everything and turned to the quieter fight. Small claims against Karina for chemicals and refill after she washed Moot with dog shampoo in my water. Not revenge, just putting costs where they belonged. Before court, I met Rita for dispute resolution. Calm voice, tidy notes. I showed the plat map, the look strong email, and the statute saying fines need real notice and lawful rules. Soon a letter arrived that sounded human. Fine rescinded, ban vacated, processes under review. Translation, we overreached. Karina staged a 2-act response, a dangerous behaviors post on the neighborhood app, pulled by moderators, and a driveway cameo. "You could have let it go," she said. "You called the police on yourself." "I went for a swim," I said. "You dialed 911. She turned on her heel. 2 nights later, my camera pinged. A hooded figure and a blur of dogs slipped through the side yard. The figure poured something into my pool. 30 minutes later, foam. I shut the system down and skimmed suds that smelled like dish soap. An officer watched the footage, filed vandalism, and had me sign a trespass letter. I added that report to the file and filed a complaint about 911 misuse. Not drama, record keeping. The department sent a warning. Fines come with repetition. By weekend, the audit had a heartbeat. Rita called a special meeting. Duff arrived small. Mara arrived. Rita laid out facts. Reimbursements to a pool store for water features we didn't have, a phantom pump house, snack receipts tied to weekends. The store's rewards number matched Duff's home phone. He tried jokes, blame, and a botanical definition of water feature. Sheila landed the punch. Pay it back and resign. He did after a vote. Small claims day came. Sam v. Karina. She brought photos of Moot. I brought receipts, test strip notes, and foam screenshots. The judge asked one question. "Did you have permission to wash your dog in his pool?" Karina tried implied. Judgment for me, chemicals, water, costs. She paid by money order. I bought a sturdier gate lock. Another camera later caught a better angle. The hoodie gained a face. The officer asked if I wanted charges. I took the middle road, a civil compromise, payment for my service call, and a written apology, in exchange for not pushing the case. The note was 2 clipped sentences. "I poured soap into your pool. I am sorry." It went in the folder. Meanwhile, I practiced petty angel compliance. I upgraded the self-latching gate, posted a "no animals in pool, owner rule," and built a jasmine-laced lattice blocking Karina's kitchen view, every dimension by the book. The new board sought counsel on limiting private pool guests. Counsel said what the documents already do. No. Regulate nuisances, not my guest list. The board published that letter, and the neighborhood exhaled. Karina eventually rang my bell, visor in hand. "I paid your judgment. I got a 911 letter. We may sell. If buyers ask, tell them it's fine." "If they ask," I said, "I'll say the board enforces real rules and most neighbors are good." She nodded and drifted away. Weeks later, a pending rider bloomed on her sign. Moving day came, Moot yawned, the truck rolled. The board's summary landed, restitution paid, discipline letters issued, a simple heads-up rule for gatherings, and this line I kept. We exceeded our authority. We reaffirm members' peaceful enjoyment of property. That sentence reset the street. I hosted a sensible swim. Corn, iced tea, Leo doing laps, teenagers setting chairs, no gossip, no glass. A young couple toured Karina's place. The lattice held their eyes elsewhere. Life kept moving. Since then, the app returned to lost cats and ladders. I still share the pool carefully. Text first. Phones in a basket. If someone treats kindness like a loophole, I close it completely. Duff and I nodded once by the cantaloupes. The new neighbors brought cookies. I offered rules and a future dip. Most evenings, I swim at dusk, breathing every 3, flipping on the line that feels like a sentence I don't have to diagram. The jasmine exhales. I lock the gate. The house is quiet. I don't need a letter to tell me what I'm allowed to do. Friends, thank you. See you soon.